Hi, and welcome to February's project build. This month, when it comes to my Kato E-8 Rock Island unit, it may appear like I didn't do a lot, but actually I did. I spent a lot of time modifying the shell. And so I'm going to take you through the process of what I did with the shell, basically to prepare it for some of the detail parts. And so I hope you'll stay tuned so you can see how I took off the dynamic brake fan, put in the porthole patches, and then essentially when it comes to the roof line, where I started to pre-drill for anything from lift rings, but then also started shaving off the grab irons and getting them ready for preparation for putting gold medal model grab irons on both the sides, and then also shaving off the molded ones off the nose and along the front, and also getting them ready for putting on new grabs there. So I'll take you through the process of my photos of what I've done since our January. So stay tuned and come on over to my workbench.
Well, as I said, the big thing for February was getting the shell ready for preparation. So the first thing I did was obviously pull the car body off the chassis. This was a pretty easy thing. Once the shell was off it, I took a look at the motor, kind of decided that when I get closer to the time, I'll probably put in a train control systems decoder in place of the DC board that's there. Flip the chassis over. The wheels are in great shape. I do know that I need to do some modifications to the fuel tank, but that will come later on in the building process. As I took the shell and turned it over, I plucked out the portal windows along the side, cab windows, and then basically the hardware that's in place for holding the front coupler pocket. Those things were really easy to take out, and then I just put them in kind of my build box so I didn't lose track of those parts. And so from this point, the shell was pretty much stripped down and ready to go. For the dynamic fan, I started with a basic number 11 X-Acto knife blade and just kind of started whittling away or kind of shaving away gently at the dynamic brake fan housing. I knew as I kept working at it, sooner or later, that the fan would kind of start breaking away in pieces. I also know from past experience working with these that sooner or later, when you trim down far enough, there'll be a hole that kind of exposes from the molding of the fan. That I was okay with, knowing that I had a KV Models dynamic brake kind of plate or cover that would go over that. So I just kind of started shaving a little bit at a time, then also using one of the filing sticks and one of the other kind of hobby sandpaper files that looks much like an emery board, and just kind of, would sand and shave and sand and shave a little bit at a time. When I got to a area that I thought looked pretty decent, I thought, okay, I'm going to stop for right now and then kind of focus my attention towards the portal windows along the side, and figured, okay, then I could go back to the dynamic brake cover, knowing that I would be using the same KV patch for the sides, that I'd also be using a very similar KV Models dynamic fan brake cover. So that worked out really well. When I took a break from the dynamic fan removal, I moved next to the portal windows along the side. This was a pretty simple. All I needed to do was use a kind of a flat edge blade of the X-Acto, and it was essentially just taking off the window's edge. There wasn't a whole lot of other work or modifications. Once that edge was gone, then I would use a sanding stick just to kind of rub it back gently back and forth, to make sure there was no imperfections and no little lips of that window's edge left behind. And then it was pretty much on to the portal patch kit, where essentially I just used the KV Models solid patch kit. I found a useful tool is just using a pair of scissors to cut them. If you try to push down on them with like an X-Acto blade, a lot of times you tend to bend them. So just an old pair of scissors does a really nice job of just cutting them nice and neat. And then I just used a little super glue in that area, lined up the patch to go right over the portal window, and would let it set for about 30 seconds, and then I would move to the next portal window and same thing, apply a little super glue with a toothpick in that area, put the patch kit down, and just let it set for a while. And in a matter of probably about 15 minutes, I had both sides of the locomotive portal windows gone and had the patch kit in place. With the portal windows done, I focused back on the dynamic fan housing. Um, Looked it over and saw that, okay, maybe I need to sand it out just a little more off to the edges of the locomotive, kind of square up that area a little bit, and then cut out the dynamic brake fan housing or plate cover. Once again, just use a pair of old scissors to cut it out. Now, the one thing you did have to do, or I found I needed to do, was the panel that goes over it is pretty flat. So I just kind of cupped it on the edges a little bit just to give it kind of a roundness like the roof would, so that when I did apply the glue, it would kind of fit nice and snug. It wouldn't kind of like bow out on the sides and that. So kind of giving it a little bend to it so that it has that nice curvature to follow the profile of the roof was very helpful. Then I just put a little super glue in the patch area and just put the patch right over where the dynamic fan used to be, held it in place for about 30 seconds, lifted my fingers off. Thank goodness I didn't, glue them to the shell. That's always my worst fear. And pretty much it was done. So a lot of the modifications to the portal window and having the dynamic brake fan removed have been taken care of and are now out of the way. The next thing I started doing then is getting ready to locate where the lift rings would be. So using a number 80 drill bit and my pin vise, I located where the holes would be for the lift rings. So I started in the back, saw where the molded ones were, and I have usually had pretty good luck drilling either right by them, and a lot of times either the little molding part will either fall off itself, or it takes nothing for just using the tip of a number 11 X-Acto blade and just shaving them. So in the back one, I put in the 4 holes for kind of the steam generator for where that plate would be lifted off. Then I moved further in the locomotive and drilled the holes for where the next panel would be. So there was a hole in each corner. And then on the other side of the dynamic fan plate, just mimicked the same thing. Located where the 4 corners were, drilled the holes, and all of that was in preparation for where the lift rings will go on the locomotive. A lot of times I have found with the lift rings, it's great to have the holes in, but I tend not to put the lift rings in until the very last, because as I'm handling the shell, it doesn't take much effort to see those things either get bent or broken off. So it's great to have the holes in place, but the lift rings are usually one of the last things that I might add before I get ready to send it to get painted. The last modification I made was taking one of the chisel blades that is X-Acto makes, and basically went along the molded grab irons and just ever so slightly started to shave those off. These aren't very deep cuts because you just want to be able to pull off the grab iron without marring up the shell or taking out any of the rivets, and so it's kind of time consuming. The other thing is, though, if you do a nice job, you get a nice clean line of where the grab iron was, and pretty easy to drill a hole at the top and at the bottom of that line to know that when you get ready to put on the detail part grab iron, where it should go. So essentially I did the fireman's side and then just flipped the shell around and did the same thing, shaving off the grab irons on the back, the middle service door, and then the engine cab. Then along the front, essentially right on the cab nose, took off the two grabs that are molded right by the headlight and the front door, shaved both of those off, and then right by the pilot there's a grab on each side of the locomotive where a crew member would be able to step up and hold on. Well, as I said in my previous video, I need to replace the step area because that was broke on the shell, but I'll replace the step but also have the grab iron there shaved off. There are also other parts on this locomotive up on the cab roof and along the sides where there'll be a walkway where I'll need to drill holes for grabs to be. However, they're not molded on, so it's pretty easy just to put in those holes and then put those grab irons in place where those need to be located. So essentially modifying, taking off the ones that are on the locomotive was the primary goal for this modification.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed some of the kind of minor details, but yet something that'll make a pretty significant impact when the model is done, as far as modifying the shell, getting rid of those porthole windows, taking the dynamic brake fan off, and then shaving off some of the manufacturer's molded parts to get them prepared for putting on gold medal model parts. My original plan was I was going to use the BLMA F unit and E unit dress-up kit, but as I started going through my inventory of parts, I've got a few of the BLMA parts, but not enough of the grabs. So I'm going to probably just mishmash the two of using maybe the grabs that are going to be the gold medal models, but maybe the cab shades, the rearview mirrors, the little walk along the side by the firemen and engineers' windows will probably be a combination of BLMA and gold medal models work. So either way, we'll make it work. And by the time it's painted, you really won't know the detail parts unless you're the builder and you've been watching these videos. So you and I will know what parts I've used in that. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you will tune in March. March's plan is basically to add those detail parts in. So January, as I said, if you go back and watch that, is pretty much the history. February was shell modification, and so for March we'll start kind of putting on the jewelry or the detail parts. So I hope you will join for the March update. As I said, usually I'm going to be updating these, or they'll be uploaded the second Saturday of every month. So be looking forward to them. So hope you enjoy, and if you have questions or comments or things you'd like to share or something that I've done that you've got a further question, please feel free to ask those in the comments, because chances may be that if you have that question, there may be somebody else at home that's watching this that has that same question. Or if there's something I'm doing and you say, hey, I've tried this and this worked out really well. Hey, I'm not an expert. I'm always willing to learn something new or something different. That's the teacher in me. I'm still a student. So I'm glad to share this with you, and I hope you have something you might be able to share back. So take care, and we'll see you hopefully next month.